What's up, kids? This is David with Solid X State Basement Church Online, coming at you with more scripture-rich video content, 10 minutes of edification for you here right now. Let's drop into this straight off, man. Let's just jump right into this, see what we got. In Proverbs chapter 23, starting in verse 7, the scripture reads that as a man thinks in his heart, so he is. As a man thinks in his heart, as a man thinks in his mind, as we think, so we are. Who we are is born up, is grounded, is rooted in our thought life. Who we are is rooted in our thought life. And where do our thoughts come from? You know, what is the mortar? What is the material of our thinking? You know, is it not our experiences, the things that we hear, the things that we're told, the things that we see, the things that we read, the people around us, how people talk to us, how we learn to talk, and all of this, our thought life is stirred and fed. And of this, you know, is the meditation of our heart, and we think upon these things. And we don't always do it in a guided manner. You know, we don't always do it with intent. Our thoughts are not always born of an informed intent. Oftentimes our thoughts are erratic, are responding rather than an intended outcome that we have recognized is optimum. Oftentimes we just act, and we don't have a good handle on why we do what we do. And yet this, you know, though this may ring true to you, it is not reflective of how the culture and the society that we live in. It is not reflective of how identity is defined in our society. I would say, I want to just say this now, that it seems apparent to me that we are, as individuals, we are who we are, and is born up in our belief. We believe. What we believe about ourselves is what we become. What we believe about who we are, the faith that is invested in our thought life, we believe it, we become it. But this view of the mind that I'm suggesting is volitional. That our thoughts give rise to our actions. This is volitional, and it seems to me a very human way. It seems uniquely human to understand that this is how we are. It is reflected in neuroscience that sees the mind as ever moldable, ever changing. That the mind is subject to the will. Think about that. That the mind is subject to the will. And yet this is not how our culture regards individuals. We live in a culture that is obsessed with identity, and yet we view identity as emerging from that material fabric that is our genetic makeup. That this is where it's an urban myth that our identity is born of our genetics. Not something that genetic biologists suggest, not something that behavioral psychologists suggest, not something that neuroscientists suggest, and yet it is the fodder. It is what we think in our society, and we're obsessed with it. We're obsessed with the notion of identity. Our politics is wrapped up in this notion of identity, of physical identity. And it seems, if you look at the history of racism, if you look at the philosophical underpinnings with which racism seeks to justify its assertions, if you look into it, you find this obsession with identity, this obsession with physical identity. That the color of your skin must say something about who you are. Your sexual behavior in our society today is described as being almost like an ethnic group. Your physical behavior categorizes you into what is almost considered an ethnic group. We've so packaged one another together into these factions and compartmentalized our behavior to represent physical identity that we've almost gone mad. It's a kind of madness that has been stirred up in us. And the truth is we don't know what we do. We don't know what we do. And we don't know why we do what we do. In the book of Jeremiah, chapter 17, in verse 9, and check this out. It says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately corrupt. Who can understand it?" The notion that we're just going to allow the emanations of our heart to run wild, like letting the dogs out, right? That is a recipe for trouble. You hear me? That is a recipe for trouble. The notion that we're going to allow the emanations of our heart to run wild and to try to justify it in suggesting that, well, this is just who I am. This is my nature. And to allow it to run wild is a recipe for trouble. Because the heart of man is disingenuous. Another word for it is, man, we're selfish and we don't like being called out on it. We are selfish and we don't like being called out. It's the whole idea of it's more comfortable in the dark because the things that you're doing aren't being seen. The motivations of why we do what we do isn't seen, so it's more comfortable in the dark. We're more comfortable in the dark because when we come out into the light, we're seen for what we are. Our motivations, our volition, our choice isn't so defensible in the light of day. Our choices are not so defensible in the light of day. In Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, I think we're looking at chapter 59 here. In chapter 59, and it's speaking sort of the condition that humanity has always found themselves in. It says the way of peace. In verse 8. Isaiah chapter 59, verse 8. The way of peace they know not, and there is no justice in their paths. They have made their roads crooked, and no one who goes in them knows peace. Therefore justice is far from us, and righteousness does not overtake us. We look for light, but behold darkness, and for brightness, but we walk in gloom. We grope for the wall like the blind. We grope like as though we have no eyes. We stumble at noon, as if it were twilight. Among those in full vigor, we are like dead men. We all growl like bears. We moan like doves. We look for justice, but there is none. For salvation, but it is far from us. It is sobering to think the effect that our thoughts can have. It is sobering to think the effect that our belief, our invested belief in our thought life, it is sobering to think of the effect that it has on ourselves, on our families, on our friends, on our neighborhoods, on our communities, in our society at large. It's sobering to think the palatable volition that we have allowed to run wild without restraint and found ourselves lost in the woods with no compass and no trail, and the sun has gone down and we do not know where we are. For as a man thinks in his mind, so he is. And this inept condition in which we find ourselves subject, this weakness in which we succumb, and that we don't have a handle on why we do what we do. Jesus Christ understood, understands, and has compassion on our weaknesses. That's why in coming to Him, for those who come to Him and set their thought life upon Him and upon His words, you can truly say, I love you, O Lord, my strength, my God, in whom I trust, my stronghold and my deliverer, the horn of my salvation and my God. And your identity will follow suit. Right. Right, man. Thanks for watching. If you've made it this far, it's been 16 minutes and 33 seconds. And if you've made it this far, good job. If you'd like my videos to be shorter, comment in the comment section below. Let me know what you think. If you don't mind the length of these videos, I'd like to hear. I'd like to, you know, if it's preferable that these are shorter, I'd be happy to try to trim this stuff down. All right, man. Take care. Later.